Photoshop, why?
Draw Jam!
You do not necessarily need to be able to draw backgrounds with perfect perspective where every single line terminates at the appropriate vanishing point to get a job in comics. I know this because I'm working in comics and I can't do that, at least without help. For the most part, if you understand the rules of perspective and how to lay things out within a space, if you fudge it, if you eyeball it, it won't be perfect, but it'll be good enough so that the casual reader will look through the book and say, oh, that looks like a background. I can tell where these characters are. I can tell where these things are. Even the most pedantic comic book critic never, ever, ever talks about vanishing points or tangents or any kind of the technical terms that we artists like to beat ourselves over. They talk about things like, oh, the anatomy is off, or this character is off model, and these things don't make any sense, and blah, 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 blah. They rarely hit upon the actual errors in your composition, like the vanishing points not matching up, like tangents making things all confused. So if things like figuring out perspective are starting to hurt your brain and preventing you from sitting down and drawing your actual composition, one, take a breather, sit back and relax, and don't worry too much about it. But two, if you are a digital artist, we have a lot of fun tools at our disposal that will help us draw things in perfect or perfect-ish perspective. I'm going to look at 4 programs today from least to most expensive and check out their perspective tools, how useful they are, how they can help us draw things in perfect perspective, and maybe how useful they could be for you when it comes time to drawing backgrounds in comics. I'm going to start with the free version of Autodesk Sketchbook. There's a paid version. I don't know the difference between the two because honestly, the free version is very powerful. I feel like people sleep on Sketchbook a little bit, but it's becoming one of my favorite tools to just play around with and just do quick sketches and quick designs and stuff. Then I'll talk about Procreate, which is very affordable, but it's iPad only. So if you don't have an iPad and Procreate, I guess you can skip that section. Although it might be fun to take a look at it just in case you're teetering on the edge of whether or not to make a decision to buy an iPad or something else. Maybe the perspective tools in Procreate will be like, that's the thing that I need to get me through the day. I'm going to talk about Clip Studio Paint. There are many flavors of Clip Studio Paint. I think I have the X version, whichever one has more frames for animation, but the perspective tools and the rulers are all in the base version as well. And Clip Studio Paint always goes on sale, and we're getting close to the school year, so maybe there might be a new sale that they're running now. I haven't checked the prices lately, but Clip Studio Paint is one of the more affordable choices when it comes time to purchase things. It's not as affordable as Procreate, but it's more affordable than Photoshop. And then finally, I will be talking about Photoshop. You'd think the big dog on campus would have some pretty good tools for rulers and perspective. We'll see. Starting off with Sketchbook Pro, I love Sketchbook Pro. I'm using the free version. I think the paid version has a couple of extra bells and whistles. I think there's like a fancy ruler that the paid version has. This is the default ruler, so, you know, works as you'd expect it, that kind of thing. And if you want to set up a 1-point perspective, it's pretty easy, although you have to turn the ruler to make sure your lines line up with that vanishing point. So if you want to actually use the perspective tools, we're going to click this sucker here, and we've got a number of different options. The magnet tells you how you can turn off the magnet so that, like, you know, you can just draw freehand. But when you turn the magnet on, all of your lines converge to that vanishing point, unless you're drawing vertical lines or horizontal lines, at least in 1-point perspective. So you can, you can lay down like a wall of a building, and then, or the interior of a room, and then draw stuff like this. So in general, I like perspective rulers in programs because when you're drawing backgrounds, you want the line width to mean something. So if you have a close line here, you can make that a little bit more thick. And then as you go deeper into your composition, you kind of use less pressure to thin out that stroke. So the 1-point perspective works as you'd expect, and you can build, just a nice little room here. Going over, we got the 2-point perspective. So you can change the vanishing points here. So this is, if you want a more shallow kind of perspective here. And then you can draw like this sort of thing that you always see when people are, when people are drawing 2-point perspective stuff. There we go. And line that up. And does it go off to the sides? Yes, it does. Can we draw vertical? So the only problem with this is it doesn't quite extend beyond here. So you have to plan out your scene accordingly. So this makes a little bit more sense. With the 2-point perspective, you can draw vertical lines fairly easily. It won't let you do straight horizontal lines. When you try, it'll line it up with this vanishing point here. So, but this is good for like, skyscrapers or this kind of thing. Can tell I really need to work on my background stuff. But yeah, I like the 2-point perspective. It's pretty cool. Across a little bit more, we got our 3-point. This is great for super dramatic shots. Let's do a top down. So let's make it a little bit shallow. Oops. And make it deep. So we can do stuff like, stuff like this. Just really dramatic compositions and really whacked out angles, which is a hallmark of the 3-point perspective. Some more of that. Now, in a comic, this perspective is a little bit too wacky, especially around the edges here. It's a little deep. So you would probably frame your panel somewhere in this area. So you kind of zoom in. But it's fun to mess around with 3-point perspective. Going down further, we have radial perspective. And this is super wackadoo, but it's for those fisheye lens scenes. If you want to get those dramatic perspectives, you can draw out your grid and then draw your stuff inside. This is a lot of fun to play with. And then you can make it bigger. So if you have a bigger scene, you can make it smaller. Same thing. You can place it wherever you want to. Radial perspective rulers are pretty rare in some of the paid programs that I use. So it's really cool to see this in Sketchbook Pro, or in Sketchbook. I don't think this is Pro anymore. But yeah, I think they got rid of the Pro moniker. But yeah, this allows you to do lots of wacky experimentation where you can mess with fisheye stuff. Maybe you draw on some cubes and then you can, didn't mean to do that. And then you can draw on your figures, Maybe somebody's looking at a porthole or something like that. You want to get that extreme lens action. And then you turn off there, and then, you construct your face within this and be like, oh, what's going on? So the radial perspective or fisheye lens perspective ruler is really fun to play with, fun to mess with. So there you go. Sketchbook Pro, a lot of very, very powerful perspective tools If you have a program that doesn't have perspective tools built in, I highly recommend downloading Sketchbook Pro. You can take a frame or a panel that you really want to have a tight background, set it up in Sketchbook Pro, draw your pencils really loosely within perspective, and then take it back to the program that you're normally used to working in, and then do all your hardcore inking there. So if your program lacks perspective, which is a weird thing to say, Sketchbook Pro will fill in that gap for you for free. Besides the perspective rulers, you also have the ellipse tool, so you can draw ellipses. Now, the one problem is that, like, if I wanted to do an array of ellipsi, I would have to physically shrink the ruler and draw in another ellipse there that way. I can't just place a spot and then continuously draw ellipses around there. So that's one dippy thing about the Sketchbook Pro rulers. They also have French curves, which are great. I have used French curves when I used to pencil and ink on actual paper instead of digitally. So it's fun to see these curves back again. And so you hit the shape, you can change it however you want. There's a bunch of different ones to choose from. You can make it bigger, you can rotate it, all the good stuff that you can do with a regular French curve. So you don't have to rotate your canvas, you can rotate the curve itself. So these are all fun tools to play with. Autodesk Sketchbook, I feel like people don't talk about it enough. I mean, I guess it's free, so maybe people don't think you can do good work with Sketchbook, but man, I find the tools and the pencils and the paints, the painting brushes in Sketchbook are pretty good. Like there's this concept brush here. Let me make it bigger. Like the blending on it is kind of fun. So like you can paint in a dark color here and then paint in your shadow. You can get some nice blending and then maybe like a highlight, make it a little bit smaller. You know, this kind of stuff. So, you know, I don't know. I like Sketchbook. I talk about it all the time. Maybe I'll do some more examples and paint throughs on the channel with Sketchbook. But yeah, check it out. If your program of choice does not have good enough perspective tools, use Sketchbook. There's a app version, pretty much the same. The only difference is that the ruler in the app version has a bendy function, so you can make these curves yourself. But other than that, it's pretty much the same stuff. They got all these fun, they have the concept art brush. Okay, next program. All right, our good friend Procreate. So we all know that you can draw straight lines with Procreate, which is very helpful for setting up perspective grids. So you can start off with horizon, just hold it down. If you want it straight, horizontal, or vertical, kind of tap as you're holding it, and then you get these, it snaps to different degrees. So like vertical, and then all the way down to horizontal. You could do your 45. So you could set up an isometric grid if you want to get froggy with it. Then you set up your vanishing points, draw, hold the line, draw, hold the line, draw, hold the line, and then set that up. And the nice thing with Procreate is that it remembers the pressure you use to draw the line. So let's say if I want to go from thin to thick, I can draw very lightly and then start drawing a little bit more hard and then straighten it out after the fact. So very nice. We can do a lot with these line tools or the smart shapes. I guess they call them smart shapes. You know, the circle one. So you draw a circle, hold it down. You can change the size. If you hit edit shape, you get control of the actual points. You can turn it to a straight circle, all that good stuff. So Procreate, I must be the only artist that you'll hear who does not like Procreate a lot, although I use it for a whole bunch of stuff. But the smart objects is one of the best features of Procreate, besides the ability to record things. I really like that you can record all of your strokes in Procreate. So I don't like this loopy inking, and I think it's really horrible. The inking experience I do not like, but I'm like the only artist you'll ever hear ever complain about it. Another nice thing about Procreate is if we go to our canvas, if we go to edit drawing guide, we can do like our grid, we could do an isometric thing, and you can turn on assisted drawing, which locks everything you draw into that grid, so you can do these fun like isometric drawings if you want to get fancy and designy. But we also have perspective, and you tap to place your perspective node. And we're going to start off with, oops, you can change the color up here, so that's cool. We're going to start off with our friend 1 point perspective, because 1 point is always great. So clear, and you can still draw horizontal and vertical. So we'll do that trick again of drawing sort of like our back wall, and then drawing up to the front wall. And line that sucker up and do that thing. When I found this out about Procreate, it blew my mind. I was like, God damn it, I hate this program, but look at this. It has something that Photoshop doesn't. It's amazing, and it's so much cheaper. All right, so we're going to go back to our editing, our drawing guide. If we tap again, we got our friend 2 point perspective. If we tap once more, we got our friend 3 point perspective. So we can get as froggy as we want to with this stuff. So we can do our whole Gotham City situation where we have a very dramatic perspective line, and you know, we can do stuff like this very quickly. You can see that this is taking no time at all to just kind of block in basic scene. So as we get out to the edges of the frame, we get a lot of warpage here and there, which is a fun effect. But again, if you're drawing comics and you want to be a little bit more tame, you kind of want to zoom in here. And then, you know, you can actually, you kind of want to zoom into this frame here, because this will make a nice little composition. And then you have your Batman. Da 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 da, spooky doo, overlooking Gotham City and saying something dark like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot I left the pizza in the oven." So very quickly you can make some pretty impressive cityscapes, and I think you can just keep adding perspective points if you want to. So, you know, just hit another. Nope, I guess not. We get 3. That's good. 3 is good. And then to select it, you can delete it. So I guess you can go up to 3 point perspective in Procreate. Still a great tool. It has its uses. I dislike the way it inks, but I use it all the time. So what the heck do I know? If you want to get started with digital art, an iPad plus Procreate, it's a pretty great combo, to be honest. So, especially with these perspective tools. Love it. Clip Studio Paint. Clip Studio has a lot of great perspective tools. If you go to the T-square, that's not a T-square, the ruler thing, you have all sorts of different rulers you can mess with. There's the linear ruler, which lets you draw a straight edge, and then when you want to paint with it, you kind of are locked onto that edge, so you can draw outside of it, and then when you draw back up to it, you're stuck there. We've got the curve rulers, ruler pen, special ruler guides, and the perspective rulers. So I like to use the perspective ones, and this allows you to set down a horizon and then a curve. So now we have 1 point perspective. So now when I start drawing stuff, everything resolves to that one line of perspective. So I can kind of fill in the rest of my room this way. You can tell I need to work on my backgrounds. You can't really tell because I'm using a pencil, so let me grab a pen. Here we go. Just get a G pen. And because everything is drawn in perspective, if you want to have a thinner line for your background, for things that are further back in space, you can draw with a lighter line. And then as you get closer, you can increase the pressure on your brush, have a darker outline, thicker line. And that thickness implies more dimension to the space. There you go. So that's why I prefer using perspective rulers instead of mapping it out and drawing just straight lines, because this gives this interior a little bit more character. It gives your interior lines a little bit more character. And then you can, you know, sketch in all sorts of stuff, like maybe this is a workbench or work desk, that sort of thing, and then color that in. I don't know what that is. Like a shelf, maybe like a tech closet, I don't know. So you can have a lot of fun, and the flexibility of Clip's perspective tools is that you can place these lines anywhere you want to. Being able to draw your perspective lines is pretty useful, especially if you're in a situation where you're close up to an object and the vanishing points are way, way, way off frame. So these, I don't know where their vanishing point is exactly. And if I want to draw a panel line like down here or like another shape, I kind of have to fudge it and eyeball it, which is fine when you're drawing comics and you're on a deadline and you need to get stuff done. But if you want to be fiddly about it and accurate as possible, you can draw a line here. You can draw a line there with the perspective ruler. And there you have your vanishing point off to the side. And then you can turn down this sucker, turn down that, and then you grab your pen and then you do your hard, whoops. And then you do your hard outlines there, kind of a softer outline here, because that'll be the edge. Oops. And then you go straight down, and then you have your other line. So this line that I kind of eyeballed was way off, and then this guy is in perspective. So I'm not sure how to establish 3-point perspective or 2-point perspective in Clip Studio Paint. That's something I have to learn and look up. But suffice it to say, Clips is very powerful with their rulers. I'm sure there's infinite ways you can customize it. They also have rulers that allow you to kind of just draw a shape, and then you can tweak it. You can grab the points and just tweak it infinitely. And then when you have that wackadoo shape where you want it, you can go grab your handy dandy pen, and let's say you want it to be thin on this side but thicker over here, and you can do that. Boom, there you go. Clips also has shape rulers. So I've got a circle selected, so you draw out a circle, and then you grab your pen, and then you can trace the circle. Now, if you don't follow the ruler, and if you draw like on the inside, it won't track. So that's a little bit disappointing. And if you go outside, it won't track. So for this, just like in Clips, you have to draw exactly on that ruler where that shows up. But I'm sure there's more ways to tackle these things. I'll have to dig into it. Okay, let's go to our last one. Good old Photoshop. So, yeah. Photoshop does allow you to hold down the Shift key so you can draw your vertical and horizontal straight lines. And it does this thing where if you hold down the Shift key and then point to somewhere on your canvas, it'll draw a straight line. So if you do something like this, where you lightly sketch out an object and then turn down the opacity on that object, and then on a layer above it, you could just click on that corner, then click there, and then click on this corner and click here and click here and click here and click here. But you'll notice the problem is that I can't really control the width of these strokes. So if I go here, maybe if I go back and forth, I can build up that stroke, but that's kind of a big waste of time. The other way I can get smooth, strong lines, straight lines, is if I want to connect this guy to this guy, I can turn on smoothing all the way up and slowly drag down, and hopefully I end it. And even then, I still get a little bit of a wobble here. So default Photoshop isn't great. I mean, we've got our vector tool here. So I can, you know, draw these kinds of lines, and I think I have it on fill. Let's turn fill off and turn on stroke. So I can get really crisp lines, and I can manipulate them after the fact. And I can change their position, change their shape, all that good stuff. And I can change the width and, you know, make it thinner, make it thicker. And I can, you know, make it dots and all this good stuff. But like in terms of actual built-in perspective tools, for being the big man on campus, Photoshop is pretty lacking, I'd have to say. Now, if you're working on a PC, there's a third-party tool called Nemu Brush, I believe it's called, that you can download and purchase. And you can set up perspective rulers across all of your programs. So if you prefer to draw in something else, you can use that. For the Mac, it took me a while to figure it out and to find one, but we have one called Hej Stylus, H-E-J Stylus. So right now it's turned off. If I draw anything, it's what you'd expect. No locked off anything, no rulers, no nothing fancy. So if I turn it on, there's a whole bunch of different buttons that you can push here. This gives you like the smooth stroke. This does some wacky effects and all that kind of stuff. All we really care about are the line tools here. And we have the regular ruler that's set up much like the ruler in Sketchbook. The difference between this ruler and the ruler in Sketchbook is that I am not confined to just drawing on this line. If I draw above it, I get my parallel strokes. If I draw below it, I get my parallel strokes. And the fun thing about this ruler is if you grab the slider in the middle, or this little square in the middle, you can get curve strokes. So let me delete what I got here. And so you can do this thing all parallel. So if you want to do the edge of a thing, like maybe this is guitar binding or whatever, you can have that effect. So this is really flexible. Let's go to this first guy. This is sort of a predictive straight edge, I guess. When you put the cursor down, the program is going to try to predict the direction you're moving and give you a straight edge. So let's draw something out here and this kind of stuff. This is good for maybe like freehanding a mech. Well, it's not perfect. But you can get some decent results here. And you're not locked into your perspective grid. So you can do things like, you know, panel decorations and things like that, or like quick scratches and things like that. It's pretty useful for just kind of sketching in straight lines and stuff. If you don't want to mess with the smoothing, the brush smoothing that's built into Photoshop. Down the line, we've got our 1-point perspective. So this one's a little bit difficult to figure out. You have to push down with your cursor and it plops down the single point for your perspective line wherever you want it. And now it'll resolve all of your lines to that one perspective line. So this is good for, you know, your anime speed lines, that kind of stuff, or setting up a 1-point perspective grid. So that's pretty cool. And if you want to turn it off, just click the center and then place your point somewhere else. So you could set up multiple perspective points and then hand draw everything. That's the problem with all of the quote unquote solutions for Photoshop, is that they're not as turnkey as something like Clips or Sketchbook. And then radial. The radial ruler is nice. You put down your circle wherever you want. You can make it bigger, you can make it smaller. If you click this sucker there, you can change the shape, so you can make it ovoid. And you don't have to draw on the ruler to make these things. So you can make all sorts of repeatable spheres, or not spheres, but ellipsi. And the nice thing about all of these is that you can turn off, or you can control how much magnetism the ruler has. So if you turn it way down, you know, it won't follow along at all. You can draw all sorts of stuff. If you turn on magnetism way up, come on. Turn it way up, you're locked in where you go. So you can customize it. If you like having straight-ish lines but still want a bit of a jitter, maybe you put it somewhere in the middle, like here, so you can still get some of that handheld feel to your curve lines. Hej Stylus is a lot of fun to play with. I'm very sad that Photoshop doesn't have some of these tools built in. I don't know enough about how these programs are made, so it's probably something that's really complex. And honestly, Photoshop is a photo editing program, so it's not like photo editors really need to be able to draw concentric circles repeatedly to do touch-ups on a portrait. So I get it. I get why these tools aren't built in, but you know, don't pretend that you're the best art program on the market, because you ain't. You're basic. There's a lot more under the hood in Hej Stylus. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can check it out yourself. The Hej Stylus stuff is very complex and robust, and it's great if you use a Mac. I don't think they have a PC version, but you have Nemu tools for PC, which is amazing. So if you are a Photoshop user, one of those will work for you to get you some sort of perspective drawing tools into Photoshop. Otherwise, you just have to kind of map it out by hand yourself. Kind of wish Photoshop had a bunch of these tools built in. A little disappointed, to be honest, that it doesn't. But again, I mean, we got Autodesk Sketchbook for free, so I can do my sketches in there and my layouts in there, and then bring it back into Photoshop and then, you know, ink it by hand. So I still get that hand inked feel and things looking somewhat in perspective. All right, I'm done. So those are the 4 I use in regular rotation on a weekly-ish basis. It depends on what I'm doing and what the project is for. I'm kind of surprised and really disappointed that Photoshop doesn't have anything to answer any of these more affordable softwares in terms of rulers and perspective. I guess you could do the thing where you draw something flat and then use the perspective transform to get it in perfect perspective. But then if you're depending on line weight to differentiate forms, you're going to have to go back in and re-ink all of those lines, because when you squash things in perspective with the perspective transform, it'll squash those lines and stuff. With Clip and Photoshop, you can also import 3D objects and turn them around. So maybe if you have a classroom space, you can bring that into Photoshop and set it at the angle that you want, and then trace over it and stuff. Clip Studio Paint has a huge library of 3D objects that people have uploaded. So you can pull all sorts of stuff, from exteriors to interiors to neighborhoods to people to mechs and all sorts of random stuff. I think Adobe is trying to build up their 3D library, so maybe that gets better through time. But I'm really surprised that at this point, a free software that anyone can download has more options in terms of perspective rulers and things like that than the Cadillac of all the softwares on this list. So Yeah, I mean, Sketchbook really for value and for flexibility and for all the functions that it has in it. Of all of the four, I would recommend Sketchbook the most, especially because it lets you just try stuff for free. I'll have to investigate what the differences are between the free version and the paid version, but you know, Sketchbook will get you very far. You can do all sorts of fun car illustrations and buildings and architecture and all that good stuff. You can do all that stuff in Photoshop as well. I just feel like there are a lot more workarounds than just plopping a ruler down and doing what you do. So those are my recommendations. I know this is not at all an exhaustive survey of digital art programs out there. If there are perspective tools in your chosen piece of software that I haven't covered here, please let me know in the comments. I'm always on the look for new programs that do things a little bit more efficiently or differently than the things that I'm currently working on. If you're working in comics, you're always up against a deadline. Even though I'm working on a graphic novel and I have a little bit more time than like a monthly assignment, I still am struggling to get things done efficiently. So if you have great tools or great plugins or things that you use to make your life easier when it comes to drawing backgrounds in perspective, please drop them in the comments. I want to know about it. I want to use it. I want to use it in my workflow because, I mean, these are good, but you know, there can always be new and better ways of doing things. So hopefully that's helpful to some of you when it comes time to make your decision on what to use for what. And if you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments or wherever you see this. And thanks for checking it out. If you're curious to see the process behind drawing a graphic novel, you can join my Patreon. I'm posting pages as I'm going through them of like the penciling phase, well, the thumbnails, the penciling, the inking, and the colors. All my patrons get to see me draw this next book that I'm working on. They got to see the cover, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in supporting my work, there's links to all that wherever you see this. And I hope everyone is safe out there, being safe and being nice to each other, because we are all that we have. So thanks for checking this out, and I'll see you next time. Bye.